Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.
There is great beauty in the void. This game gives me a great deal of unease. Sometimes it just strikes me with a feeling of fear. Fear of falling into nothingness. But in all fairness, I also felt that feeling on the 3rd floor of my primary school. So I wouldn't be surprised if your reaction to this game is quite a bit more sedate. The Agarans found the location of their ancient ancestral homeworld, unifying to settle it again, devoting all of their resources to a joint effort. But just as they were about to set off, their new homeworld, Karak, was attacked by unknown alien invaders, being decimated in the process. Those who were about to undertake the expedition represented the final hope and existence of the Agarans. And now they had nowhere to go but forward. That's the plot of Homeworld 1. And while at times it is fairly predictable, with some of the missions only being there I believe to lengthen the game, and others to nudge it more towards the safer realm of adventure. That feeling of the Agarans clinging to the hope of survival, and their sorrow at losing most of their people, being desperate, are elevated to brilliance. And that's done in a very strange, surprising way. The story is told in a very plain, stark manner. Cutscenes in between missions are mostly near static cards, with very little movement. Grey. The voice acting is professional. Militaristic. A whole lot of sci-fi word salad gets used. Everyone's tone is composed, giving no indication towards the speaker's emotional state.
Analysis of wreckage reveals the hostile units are using strike craft ranging from fighters to combat corvettes.
Hyperspace transition complete. We have arrived at Karos.
The use of the forbidden atmosphere deprivation device in your planet finally triggered the rebellion.
And that makes the rare occasions that a sliver of emotion, so minute, perhaps imagined on my part, have so much more impact. You almost never see anything living, and even then, it leaves a lot to the imagination. The Agarans have a humanoid silhouette at the very least. Add to this the good music and you get the touching experience. The music for combat fits quite well. Quite tense and battle ready. And in between combat sessions, there's eerie silence, with a few noises thrown in, spaceships settling, that kind of thing. But on the more emotional music side of things, some of you might find that using that song from Platoon to elicit an emotional response is kind of stacking the deck. Even when that song is used to accompany a parody, it has emotional heft. The Spartan way in which the story was told probably took it to heights it otherwise never would have achieved. It invites you in to feel the plight of the Agarans. And it kept me enthralled, even when the story took those turns towards the more marketable and traditional. The story isn't as good on Homeworld 2, however. It has the same stark dryness, but with a protect the homeworld from invaders plot. More standard territory. You know, defeat the enemy. With some techno-fantasy thrown in. But in all fairness, I suppose the interactions with the Bentusi did give it a bit more emotional heft. But for the most part, the sequel's story wasn't as good. Visually, the games are quite splendid as well. Kind of empty, but that's understandable, as ship movement is measured in kilometers. But there are asteroids, dust clouds, debris, as well as the enemy. The ship design is very metallic and boxy, except for the motherships, which are huge and mostly unique in design. You always have to protect your apple slice. But most of the visual beauty comes from the backgrounds. Space, stars, nebulae, or whichever one is correct. The splendors of the void. This works very well, although both games do have a tendency to overuse orange and yellow. So some of the levels may look a bit too similar, especially when it's a particularly open patch of star. Gameplay-wise, the game is okay. There are different classes of ship, and ideally you'll match them up against the ship type they're strongest against. But usually when you're going up against big fleets, their composition is quite diverse, and it's harder to make the correct matchups, since another ship will probably be there to counteract you. Sure, the AI can be quite a bit quicker and more precise than you are when making these decisions. But since the space between the ships is usually quite large and the scale is massive, and your ships can be quite difficult to find at times, not to mention slow, bigger ship models especially, it makes it a bit more difficult for you to change tactics on the fly, as there is no function to pause and issue different orders. Add to that the fact that ships are manufactured quite slowly, and you might not be able to replace units as quickly as you may in other RTS games, and also the added complexity of being able to move three-dimensionally. That, in my opinion, is more of a faff really. I didn't really bother with it much, even though the game says it can be beneficial to strike from above or below to hit sensitive points of a ship, where the armor is weaker. But all in all, in my experience, there wasn't really much of a reason for me to engage in tactics. I usually just made sure that I had more units than the enemy, and just paid enough attention to avoid me needlessly throwing them into a grinder, and just accepted that this was gonna be a bit of a slog. But hey, I'm not really a 5-star general. Maybe there's more tactical depth here than I can realize, but the way in which the units move seem a bit slow for that to be the case, or maybe it just requires far too much focus towards gameplay that isn't that fun. Pretty backdrops can only distract you so much. Adding to the slowness is the fact that units are carried over between levels, and thus usually I waited until I had gathered all the resources of a level and converted them into ship so that I had the drop on the enemy on the next level. Homeworld 2 does flow a bit better though, because the ability was removed to stay in a level after you've completed the objectives. Plus, they were nice enough this time to automatically collect all of those resources left. Unfortunately, I assumed this was unchanged, and only realized differently after an immense amount of time watching resource collectors collect space dust. But even if you don't succumb to this error, this is really more of a game for the patient. It's really rather plodding. There aren't many opportunities to cut off the enemy's resources, or out-resource them, because usually there are only a few pockets of resources. So shipbuilding and combat are the main tactical areas. There are other strategies you can employ, such as ships with special abilities, but since the ships move so slowly, that can be rather finicky. For instance, trying to move the grav well in range and use it at the appropriate times while still protecting it. You can bomb the hardpoints of bigger ships though. But in Homeworld 1, there aren't that many hardpoints to bomb. On Homeworld 2, there are more of them, but usually they are production facilities, and you can bomb them to, say, take away a ship's ability to produce fighters to attack your incoming bombers. But these tactics can have limited efficacy, because they can be rebuilt. And if you're facing off against multiple ships with the ability to produce fighters, staying there with your bombers will lose you a lot of bombers. And you can't just strafe the hardpoints, because the repairs can be done quite quickly. On to the campaign missions. They are kind of strange in terms of difficulty. Most of the difficulty is located on missions fairly early in the games. And on later missions you have a lot of ships at your disposal, and sometimes very little opposition. And in those situations you can kind of steamroll over them. Plus, at that stage, you will be hoarding a lot of resources. Your fleet will almost always be close to full. Near the end, there is a spike in difficulty though, but other than that, the games in general are easy. So, the visuals will have to be more of a draw here, as well as the story, at least for Homeworld 1. They're the main reason I kept on playing, because arguably the gameplay at best is okay. I completed Homeworld 1, and ran out of steam on the final mission of Homeworld 2. And that took me 29 hours. And it is cheap on Steam. Well, sort of. The full price is a fair bit at 359 Rand, but on sale it goes down to 35 Rand 90, which really takes the sting out of it. That's 1 Rand 24 per hour of gameplay, which is quite splendid. But to download it is a bit tricky though. It takes up 8,403 megabytes on the hard drive. Although there's an argument to be made that it's not that bad, as it includes Homeworld 1 Remastered, Homeworld 2 Remastered, Homeworld 1 Classic, and Homeworld 2 Classic. And the remastered versions work on the Warhorse. So I'm guessing the classic versions will work as well, because the remasters work quite well. And stereotypically, I suppose it's okay for kids. I mean, you don't see the people die when the ships explode. At times it's a bit sad though. Grim. Homeworld 1 has an okay story told in an extraordinary way. In my opinion, it's the main draw of the game. But I do recognize that not everyone will agree with me. It's very dry and militaristic. And that may not elevate it in the same way for you as it does for me. So please consider for yourself if you will like it. On those grounds, without the austere presentation, the story would have been quite mediocre. The game in general probably as well. And please remember, the second Homeworld isn't as good on the story front. The game has good visuals, great backgrounds, and good unique mothership design. And the game has good music, although some of you will resent and find the fact that they used the song from Platoon a touch heavy-handed. And let's fulfill my pretension quota right now, that piece is called Adagio for Strings. It's a quick-fire way to craft sadness. On the maybe side, the difficulty spread is a bit strange. Most of the difficulty is located early on and late on in the games. On the con side, some missions are just there to lengthen the game, at least in my opinion. And I do concede that this con is quite harsh. A lot of games probably do this. But in Homeworld 1 there's a particular level of issue here, on Mission 15, Chapel Perilous, where a truly bizarre objective / threat is brought to the fore. Spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. In this game where you mine asteroids, when the enemy's backs are against the wall, they decide to fling an even bigger asteroid towards your mothership, and you have to attack it with your ships before it collides. What? Maybe I'm being too harsh again here, but when I originally saw it, it really threw me. Now with hindsight, I can argue to myself, maybe it makes sense, you know? But at the time I was like, wait, this is your gambit? A rock? And also, arguably, the gameplay isn't that fun. It's a bit difficult and finicky. The ships move slowly and in a lumbering fashion. Sometimes they're difficult to see, difficult to control, and thus difficult to order around. You can order them into groups though, but I didn't bother doing that. If you truly feel that that's enough to swing this situation, take that into account. And I suppose that the gameplay is satisfying when you're winning. It's kind of slow in general, more a game for patient gamers. As said, I mostly played through the game because I liked the story, and was interested enough in the fate of the Agarans to even play through most of the second one too. Come on, play it. Space is full of wonders, things that have kindled our curiosity, our desire to explore for so long. Plus, apparently it also contains this irrationally, illogically big piece of space junk. I mean, that thing must have its own orbit.
Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.